Psychosocial safety is the latest buzzword in health, safety and wellbeing circles. And for good reason. Australia has really led the charge in bringing psychosocial hazards into the spotlight, and they've sparked important conversations about why it's crucial for every business to address them. But when it comes to understanding what psychosocial hazards actually are and how to manage them, things can get confusing. There's a lot of jargon and a lot to get your head around. So how do big organisations handle this? Hi, I'm Sarah McGuinness, founder of Revolutionaries of Wellbeing, and I'm on a mission to break burnout culture for good. This podcast is all about giving you the practical tips and ideas you need to create a healthier, more supportive workplace and support your wellbeing too.
You know, psychological risk is complex and it's really challenging to articulate and structure. So this journey is really taken the last 4 years.
Today, we'll explore a case study from the New Zealand transport agency, Waka Kotahi, and look at their structured approach to identifying and managing psychosocial hazards.
But yeah, it's that harmful interactions can be quite pervasive to all areas of the business. You know, we have instances of people just wearing lanyard and being, accosted in the streets.
I'll be chatting with Shelley, Easton and Ryan Young, who will walk us through how their organisation has used ISO 45003 as a framework. They'll share how they've secured senior leader buy-in, implemented effective controls, and set up systems to continuously monitor their impact. It's about making real, meaningful progress. Being perfect isn't the goal here. If you're a wellbeing champion, HR professional, or health and safety manager, you'll want to stick around for this one. There is so much to learn from Waka Kotahi's experience and plenty of practical takeaways for your organisation. Let's dive in.
I am Shelley and currently dialing in today from Palmerston North. And yeah, kia ora to everyone on this call and those that will listen to the podcast afterwards. I currently hold the role of Health and Safety and Wellbeing Manager for our corporate functions. So our corporate functions is all of our internal functions. And as you might be aware of what NZTA Waka Kotahi does, there's also a big external program as well, those that are on our roads and fixing our network and things like that. So I look after the internal function, so that's roughly just under 3,000 people across roughly 20 offices. And I've worked here for about 16 years, so I feel very much part of the furniture. Started out in the contact centre, which I think has been a real key to kind of my, success at Waka Kotahi, and the fact that I've kind of done so many different roles. I think, understanding the business is really, really important. I also started as a health and safety rep in about 2016, and I moved into a permanent health and safety role in 2020, which was just before COVID hit. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll pass you over to Ryan.
Kia ora everyone, my name is Ryan. I am from Paparumu up on the Kapiti Coast, but based in the beautiful Wellington at the moment. Pretty cloudy today, but that's nothing unusual. And I am the Senior Critical Risk Advisor, Mental Health and Wellbeing at Waka Kotahi. So I've been in the organisation and in this role for about 9 months now, so relatively new. Have a background in case management around mental health, so worked at ACC for a while, and then went and joined the Royal Commission into Abuse and Care to do some of that work. And I was lucky enough to be able to get into health, safety and wellbeing at the Royal Commission of Inquiry. That led me into some other work with the Ministry of Ethnic Communities, and then luckily enough on to Waka Kotahi, where I'm in the role now.
And what rich backgrounds you both have, and I can imagine in going through this process, those skills and knowledge and experience have been really helpful. So let's start with what prompted NZTA Waka Kotahi to go down the track of looking at psychosocial hazards?
So I think really the big prompter was our new CEO come on board early 2020, which was Nicole Rosie, who had come from WorkSafe, and she had a big background obviously in safety and things like that, and that was very much on her agenda to start with, is how we're managing our hazards and risks, and it was one of the first things she did is agreed on our 5 critical risks. So psychological harm is one of those 5 critical risks. The other ones, just for your information, being harmful interactions, driving, roadside work, and construction. First, forefront, psychological harm, critical risk, how we're going to manage it. But what we didn't have is a systematic way of assessing what psychological harm was, how did we monitor it, and then, of course, how we manage it. And it was certainly something we lacked earlier prior to her arrival, 2019, I believe, we had an external company come in and do a risk bow tie for psychological harm. But what we noted, and what I was particularly uncomfortable with kind of coming into the team, was that there was poor risk articulation and structure. Many of the causes or threats were just failed controls, like, for example, poorly managed change or poor leadership. Poor work relationships. It always had that kind of negative connotation at the beginning. And the controls were really waffly, like inconsistent leadership or inauthentic leadership or behavior, which didn't kind of sit well with me. It's like, if we can't really articulate it well, then how do we manage it? And also the risk bow tie, if you're familiar with those, the relationship is linear in a normal risk bow tie. And from my understanding of psychological harm, we know that it's not always a linear process from the threat to managing the negative harm. We know that many controls can be used to mitigate a threat, and they can be used in any order. They can, any arrangement. One might be enough. You might need three, depending on the person or the situation, because, the people are at the heart of this, risk management structure. Also in 2019, there was minimal ELT involvement. We had a lack of robust data, very little awareness really to be able to step up to ELT and the board, to talk through this risk. So really starting fresh was our best option. And we're fortunate to have a really good risk and assurance team here at Waka Kotahi, and they manage various other risks like financial and reputational, etc. It was through them that we decided that we'd use ISO 45003, which is the guidelines for managing psychological risk. And that's kind of how we decided to start. And we started fresh. And that was kind of a really risky thing to do, I suppose, but a brave one also. It also gave us a clean canvas to really kind of put on paper what we knew we needed to do. The ISO guide really helped us understand our context. We considered both external and internal issues that affected our outcomes. So essentially, our organisation can't achieve our outcomes if we don't have good psychosocial or psychological risk management. And that included things like, what are our customer service requirements, what's the size and nature of our workforce, etc. And the ISO guide really talks you through this. We've defined what we meant by psychological risk, which I think, again, is really important. So for us, it's the combination, I'm just going to read this out. So the combination of occurrence of exposure to work-related hazards of a psychological nature and the severity of injury or ill health that can be caused by these hazards. Hazards of a psychological nature include aspects of work. So that's how the work is organised, the social factors at work, exposure to traumatic events, and the work environment. So once we'd defined that context, then we're able to divide the risk into 4 sections. So as I mentioned before, aspects of work, social factors, traumatic events in the work environment. And that helped us frame what we could control at work, because we all know there's lots of other things happening in personal lives, and sometimes you can get a little bit overwhelmed with that. But this really helped us frame what we were in control of and how we can best mitigate what we are responsible for here. It allowed us to focus our attention supporting people's wellbeing, etc. What else in this here? We looked a little bit about the nature of work, what roles we had. So if I think, for example, our transport operations centres are exposed daily to traumatic images of crashes, and sometimes it's the audio from police, ambulance, etc., to our contact centre, who often receive abusive calls, to our processing centres, which are often translating quite traumatic material into our systems. Also, too, probably my last comment is that we are now sponsored at ELT level, which really kind of embodies the commitment that we have at NZTA Waka Kotahi right at the leadership table, which is really, really important. However, we engage at all different levels, and Ryan will talk a little bit about that later, and who we're engaging with and why that's important. So that's from our executive leaders to our senior managers to our people leaders, workers, HSRs, etc. Just wanted to reiterate that psychological risk is complex and it's really challenging to articulate and structure. So this journey is really taken the last 4 years.
And so helpful to put that timeline around it, because I think it'll be easy for people to think, oh, well, I'll just, get it done in an afternoon, or, a couple of days, running around the business, talking to people and then sort it through. But actually, as you say, there's a lot more to it. Two things that came to mind, Shelley, what you're talking through. One was, so it sounded like when Nicole Rosie came in, you did have that most senior level engagement, but how did you find the engagement with the other leaders? Were they as understanding of what psychosocial risks were? Was there any concern that you might kick over some big rocks, and so therefore some reticence to get involved? How did you find that?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely with kind of starting something new and raising a new focus is always difficult. But Nicole's she's really strong, really staunch on, well-being at the heart of everything we do. And it's actually in our values and behaviours, so it's right the moment you sign up to start work here, it's right in front of you. So then by default, you do have it's that leading by example kind of framework, leading from the top. What we also did, we created a working group of people that were passionate about it, people who had skills in this area, and people who were exposed, who were kind of our high risk areas. So the information we got from them was the best information we could from around the place. It wasn't hiding anything. It was putting it all on the table. And it did feel a bit vulnerable to start with. But what was great is because we had a process that was saying, yep, this is what's happening right now, but this is what we're going to do about it. And I think that was really important. And having it structured this way allowed ELT to be like, okay, I can see what you're doing now, and how can we help, and where do we need to put more resources and things like that, rather than just saying, oh, we're hearing this is going on, we need to do something about it.
And as you said, sort of managing that vulnerability that they were experiencing. Yeah. I realized that my second question actually rolls in really nicely to where I want to take this with you, Ryan, and ask you, what was the process that you went through for identifying? And the question I had underneath that was, aside from the assessment itself, which I'm really interested to learn more about, was it department by department or issue by issue, or what were some of those steps that you took?
Yeah, so with the way that we sort of approached it, so we obviously framed it using the ISO model. So again, sort of reflecting on what Shelley said, is what's in our locus of control and where can we make the biggest change? So using that ISO framework to see where we should target our efforts and where the hazards are. So looking at those, and then using the working group that Shelley mentioned, we sort of engaged in that group and see where are the threats, where is the harm coming from, and working with that group to sort of identify it. I mean, we have some idea working where we are, but the people know the best, So working with them to get a good understanding to create that initial sort of enterprise level risk assessment of how we see it generally. How does that look for our businesses? Where are the threats? What are the controls that we have in place already? And what are the insurances that we have in place around those controls? Going from that higher level, what we then sort of do is go out to our business groups, because, these are the people working day in, day out with these risks, and getting their understanding. Is this sort of how it looks for you in your day-to-day? Are these the sort of risks that you come up with? And are these controls, do you know about them? Are they working? Is there something that we're missing? What else should we be looking at from that perspective? So having that base understanding, getting those people together to have that discussion and provide us that overarching lens, and then drilling down into each group to see what are the specifics that we sort of need to focus on and address, and if there's anything that we're missing, and then going forward with that. And that's a continual sort of process that we're doing. It's not just a once-off, that's done, let's move on. It's always evolving. So, we're going to be meeting with these groups regularly to understand what's changed since last time that we had a chat. Is there something new that you're doing that we don't know about up at this level? And what else can we be doing to make sure working here is safe and enjoyable, so you can do your best at work and, flourish in your position. So yeah, that's sort of how we engage with our groups. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add on there, Shelley, in regards to that.
Yeah, no, you've pretty much nailed it. A couple of things that we did kind of was create, as I mentioned, the working group. And part of that was for them to complete a task analysis, so really just looking at what they did, what were the hazards, talking to their teams before coming to that working group. We also used tools like survey. So once we had identified the controls, we made best use of people's time by then putting them all into a survey type tool and getting them to provide us feedback. So Ryan and I have ended up with a really good collection of data with lots of people's experiences with the controls. So for example, EAP. We know that people's experiences can vary, and we wanted to capture that before we made an assumption whether it was effective or not. And that was a good way. I mean, everyone's busy, but when you get a meeting in your calendar, you're just like, oh, yeah, I thought I had some time. So these kind of tools are quite helpful, some little bit of pre-work, some survey, a meeting, to get the best information from people without taking too much of their time. And I don't know whether probably Ryan, it's now best to share the slide that we've got, because we're starting just to talk about identifying threats. And I've talked a little bit about what's on the left-hand side here. So what we're looking at here is our bow tie for aspects of work. And you'll notice it looks a little bit like a bow tie, but it's a little bit different in a sense that it's not linear. So on the right-hand side, we've got our aspects of work, social factors, traumatic events and work environment. In the blue boxes, we've got our threats. So these are just three of the multitude of threats that we have to those themes. So if I kind of look at role ambiguity, change management, workload and work demands, and you'll see here that what it's all pointing towards is a toolkit of controls. Now, again, there's more controls here, but just for ease of the slide. So one of our controls is regular one-on-ones with a people leader. And what we've done is we've really broadened this. So in our risk management system, they're regular one-on-ones with the people leader, but they're also regular one-on-ones to identify warning signs of stress, regular one-on-ones to identify whether the person's workload is manageable, regular one-on-ones to check in if the person's okay. So this is kind of where we came down to really clarifying your controls. Just because the people leader is having one-on-ones, is that enough? Where does the people leader need more help or support? Is the people leader equipped to have those difficult conversations? And this is kind of where we really are pulling apart the controls. Our speak up channel, whistleblower, etc. We've just introduced a new speak up channel called sensitive events, because this was we identified this particular control as lacking, or it was only partially effective because we didn't have enough transparency over our controls. So this is kind of where we can really pull it apart. We can do some survey, see if it's really working. We can talk with some of our senior leaders. And in this case, we decided, no, it wasn't as effective as what we needed, and we needed to put some more effort in. So that's just some information on that particular control. And then, of course, we've got the unwanted event in the middle, which comes down to our definition of psychological harm. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, we have our post-incident kind of controls and what we do there. So, for example, direct intervention from the person, the people leader, for example, or HR. Once the harm has occurred, if it occurs, what can we do to mitigate the consequence? EAP has some really specific programs that they can run for people who are showing signs of distress. So we make sure those are well utilised, and that we've got an ability to ring someone. So I know Ryan can do this. If we know someone needs to speak to EAP now, we can arrange that. So that's kind of some of those assurances we put in place there. So for those that are listening to this podcast, they won't have this this bow tie. So hopefully I've explained it okay. And we've got one of these bow ties for all of those themes. So one for aspects of work, one for social factors, one for work environment, and one for traumatic events.
I'm just going to pull out that question that somebody had, because I thought that was really good, and perhaps we'll link into what you've been talking about. So it sounds like you've pulled harmful interactions out as a separate critical risk. What was the reason for doing so?
So we've got a number of different channels that our people can, say, for example, contact NZTA Waka Kotahi. And some of these don't necessarily cause psychological harm. So they've got other implications like reputation and things like that. So they were pulled out as a separate critical risk, also because it's so prevalent and it's only getting worse in our environment. So dealing with it separately was really important, that we actually put a separate focus on it. But Ryan works really closely with our Harmful Interactions Critical Risk Advisor. We're very fortunate to have resources in all of our critical risks. So Ryan and Shona work really close together to ensure, because there is definitely an overlap, 100% is an overlap. And so it sits, we factor it in within our psychological harm critical risk, but it's also factored in our harmful interactions critical risk assessment. So it's everything from our roadside workers receiving physical and verbal abuse, our contact centre workers, our people that go out on community engagements, our team that deal with social media, our team that deal with our emails. Like it's a huge risk, and so that's why we've separated it out.
It's one of those risks where you can't turn the tap off, right? You can't just go, well, we're not going to talk
Correct.
to all of our public anymore.
Correct.
So I do want to ask a bit about that, and yeah, please share.
Yeah, I was just going to add on that, there is that, obviously, that overlap there. And Shelley rightly pointed out that we're lucky to have that resource and we have worked closely together in that space. But yeah, it's that harmful interactions can be quite pervasive to all areas of the business. We have instances of people just wearing lanyards and being, accosted in the streets. So it's sort of everyone, and even to people driving our vehicles on the road, that's branding that's out there for the business. So whatever people's association with Waka Kotahi, our people carry that as well. So it's really important that we have that focus on that side of things as well, with the lens of psychological safety as well and making sure our people are well. But we are quite fortunate to have that resource there where we can really focus on those side of things, making sure that we mitigate the risk where we can and support our people to be well at work. So just wanted to highlight that.
And with the harmful interactions risk assessment, we have things in there that aren't related to psychological harm. So, for example, we look at an altercation, say at one of our reception, they have duress procedures, with the blue button on the desk. They go through de-escalation training, etc. And then there is the psychosocial component, but there are other controls we put in place that aren't of a psychological nature.
I can imagine just how wide-ranging that must be. So actually, on that note, thinking about some of the other risks that you have, say I take the traumatic events, or in fact any of them, what have been some of the most successful strategies that you've put in place? And one of the things, it might be the similar or different question, one of the things I was thinking about was how do you manage the effectiveness or because you could have leader one-on-ones, but how do you know that the one-on-ones are actually having the effective conversation that you're hoping they will be?
Yeah, so there's throughout the risk assessment process and sort of this evolution, we sort of identified where controls are in place to support our people. And so sometimes it's not even just creating something new, it's about bolstering stuff that we already have in place. And in terms of figuring out if they're working well or where we need to focus our attention, we're quite fortunate, in my perspective, to have some really good data streams that we can really tell a narrative from. So one of them is our regular staff engagement survey that goes out every 8 weeks. So it's not a yearly one, it's quite regular, and we do have quite high engagement in that. But there's a section in there that sort of relates solely to wellbeing, which we can sort of drill down into. And it is anonymous, but we can sort of see what pockets of the organisation might need specific support, and to see and to sort of track how we're going in those spheres. So it sort of measures things in regards to a social aspect, organisational support, mental wellbeing, and physical wellbeing. So over time, we can track how things are going and see what the overall health of our controls are. Some of the controls that we have in place, for example, the people leader one-on-ones, we don't have specifics on how often they have these one-on-ones. There's to a degree, we can't really tell the quality of the one-on-ones, but through these measures like our regular engagement survey, we can pull out themes that can sort of indicate how these are going. So for some, it's around using what we have to measure sort of how we think things are going, but not also just using one stream of data. We also have a few others, like our peer-to-peer mental health support network. So these are people ingrained in our business who work with each other on a day-to-day basis and are having those deep conversations. So we get high-level theme reporting from them as well. It's looking at our HR data as well, like our leave usage. Where are some pockets of the business that might need a bit more support? Do we need to drill down into what's going on for them? Luckily enough, our EAP data has a lot of information in there that we can sort of see our trends and what our people need support with. There's our health and safety reporting portal that we use as well. And also just having those good quality conversations like the water cooler conversations, which we can get information from. So using that data, we can never use anything in isolation, because you can read one thing one way and then, so we're very big on pulling it together into a narrative to see, is it cohesive? What is this saying? What does that say about our controls? And in terms of the effectiveness of stuff like the traumatic events, we do put in stuff like we have had group sort of supervision sessions where we get the support from our people, and we measure that through direct feedback through them. I usually check in with some groups who have it regularly and see how it's going, but also surveys as well to see what's working for them, what's not, so they can speak up in a confidential forum. I'd like to hope that people can speak to me openly and honestly, but we all know that might not be the case. So it's ways and means about getting that information that can sort of be anonymized, so we actually know the real picture, so that people aren't just telling me a nice story when they're really thinking it's not that great. Yeah. So sorry, that was a really long way around, but there's stuff that we do, and we use a lot of information to paint a picture as opposed to just one stream of data, because we know that if you look at one, it might not be the full picture. Yeah.
And I've got another example, and then I see there's a question in the chat about peer mentors, so I can answer that one as well. So we did a lot of effort in really bolstering our EAP program, especially over COVID. And I used to manage the relationship, and now Ryan does, where previously that wasn't managed as well. One thing we did with that is that we ran a series of webinars. We did a lot more communications about it. Our EAP usage has gone up, but we don't see that as a negative. It's gone up in our personal related factors. Anyone that kind of looks at EAP data, if you're about 80% personal and 20% work, that's about kind of the accepted standard for making sure that your organization doesn't have too many systemic problems, I suppose you'd say. And people are engaging with EAP to help them in their personal lives. So one thing we did, I'm just thinking of an initiative we did, was we offered financial wellbeing webinars. So it's just another facet of wellbeing. And these were the most attended webinars we have ever had. We had 200 to 300 people online. We ran a second one about KiwiSaver because that was coming up in our post survey, and then we had a big uptick in people accessing EAP for financial budgeting and things like that. So it's really about kind of getting. Sometimes things happen on a bit of a hunch. Then you can test it. Does it work? Yes, it did in this instance because we could measure it, and then we could get the information from EAP to suggest that was really successful. And we've done a few other things, like Ryan's running one on sleep and fatigue with EAP in the next couple of weeks. So it's kind of just branching out from your normal, say, mental health type webinars to really think more holistically about what we can offer staff and just trying things, So I suppose I can comment on the peer-to-peer. So we have a mental health first responder program that's been running since pre-2020. That was just more a information session for some of our leaders. I took it up in 2020 to make it more of a first responder session, because what we were hearing from our people was that they would come away from these sessions and they'd be really knowledgeable. They'd know all sorts about mental health conditions and symptoms and things like that. But when it actually came to having a conversation, they felt inequipped. They felt they would freeze. They didn't know what to say. We transferred our mental health first aider program into our mental health first responder program. And that was all around having conversations about mental health. So now we've got about 100 mental health first responders at Waka Kotahi. They get yearly training from an external provider, and they Ryan and I run quarterly support group meetings. So that's really just to have a check-in with the network, get a bit of around the table, around the virtual country, because they're in all of our offices and on some of our project sites. We have a Teams channel that we can put in resources and things like that we find. And we also do reporting. Now, reporting is not about each conversation. It's just mental health first responders will report roughly how many interactions that they had per month. So that was an interaction as defined as if they say, oh, hey, Joe, how was your weekend? Oh, no. And they kind of get a bit of a sense that it wasn't so great, and it kind of turns into that conversation around where you go through, checking for harm and validating their feelings, and you go through a bit of a step-by-step process, and so they report those in just numbers, and also the themes that they were about, and that's a channel for them to say if they need any more help or resources, and we get a lot of information through there. Especially about themes. And at the moment, it's a lot about change. And so Ryan and I are doing a heap of work with our HR and employee relations teams around how we manage change. And that's just a really great, another data source, as Ryan said before, about how we really paint the picture about what's going on for our people.
If I can make an observation, one of the things I think we've seen is the organisations who do wellbeing or managing psychosocial risks well are ones who collect data on a really regular basis, every 8 weeks, or I think there are other organisations every month or whatever it is. I think it's, it sounds like leaving it to the once a year engagement survey doesn't give you that real-time data, as you said, to also compare it with other sources. The other thing I was thinking that was really powerful in what you've talked about is that you act on the feedback. So that's the other part organisations often do, is collect lots of data and then they don't see any change. So I am going to ask this question here in the chat, and then I'll come back to where I want to take that. So what's your average participation rate with your survey every 8 weeks?
It's roughly about 75 to 80%, isn't it, Ryan?
Yeah, about that. Yep.
It's really high. It's really high.
Yeah, and we used to do it more regularly. So I think it was 6 weeks, wasn't it? And that was probably a bit too close together to be able to see the information, take it all in and make actions. Because if you're just taking in the information and, as you sort of said, Sarah, not doing anything with it, people's participation is going to drop off and their feelings around it actually being heard. So we did space that out a bit wider so that we can actually, our leaders can make changes when they're needed. And if there's organisational stuff that we need to address, then we do that as well. So that's sort of why it's at that stage. Some other data sort of does come through monthly. So we do monthly reporting as well. And if something of concern comes through quicker, then we will address that sooner rather than later. So yeah, I definitely agree with the regular reporting. I do remember the times of the once-off survey, and that was great. I thought it was back at the time, but having that more regularly means you can get a more on the pulse sort of feeling about how your people are feeling and if there's something we need to do immediately, as opposed to wait until the end of the year when that data might have already been gone and that feelings, or the people might be gone because nothing's changed. So yeah, really fortunate in that space to have this resource, I believe.
There is the ability to provide feedback to comments. So everything's anonymous, but if someone is signalling signs of distress or harm, we can actually reply anonymously back to them to an anonymous portal. So they get an answer from us straight away if we sense that there's any urgency around that, which I think is a really vital tool, because it is a speak up channel, but it's obviously confidential and anonymous. So, but it doesn't mean that we can ignore stuff that's coming through. We can act on it. If people are sharing information that we have a process or a procedure for, we can go back with, please complete this form, or please use sensitive events. I'd encourage you to report this, so we can act on it. So it's a one-way channel, but there is a little bit of two-way that we can use as well, which is really beneficial.
Gosh, it's really powerful. I'm not sure if you have experienced what we have. We sometimes read through survey data and think, oh my goodness, that comment, it does make you think that person needs support. So that's pretty amazing. Tell me, what has been the impact that you've seen since you brought in all of this work around the psychosocial hazards?
Oh, impact. I think what's really important is that we have the likes of Ryan and Shona and our critical risk advisors now, and that's been, as I said, this whole thing's taken 4 years. We had a Safe Plus assessment in 2022 that really identified that what we were doing was good. We got a performing rating, which we were really proud of, but we want a leading rating or a really high performing rating. And so we were able to act on all the recommendations from Safe Plus around psychological harm. And now we're fortunate to have the likes of Ryan, whose kind of dedicated role is to look after this, whereas previously I was doing it as part of my role as Manager Health, Safety and Wellbeing. And I was super passionate about it and I made it a priority, but realistically it wasn't sustainable. So I think the effect, and if you're kind of looking at it from the outside, is we have dedicated resources. The business is willing to put, time and money on these things. We're also, everywhere there's communications, we're in there. Like there's not many communications bulletins that come out that doesn't have some kind of a health, safety, wellbeing moment. And that's from our ELT and board reports. That's our group general reports. That's our people leader updates. Ryan's and Shona and the other critical risk advisors are just starting to share some data and insights in those reports now, because what you don't know, you can't manage. So we're starting to share some of our data in those people leader reports. We're in every health and safety rep meeting. We're there sharing data and insights, getting kind of the feel from the floor. And I think that's probably our effect, is that we're everywhere now, whether as, maybe 2020, we were just trying to get into little bits, and people want us. I think Ryan gets that many requests to come and speak to team meetings, and I do a fair bit too. So that's definitely positive.
Yeah, that's right. And then also, just if we reflect on, I hate to bring it always back to data, but that trend that we're seeing slowly but surely is improving through the engagement around our wellbeing. And even if you look at our EAP data, the trends for people accessing support, that percentage is going up for personal as opposed to work, which is going down. So there's ways that we're tracking it that indicate that we're going in the right direction. But you'd never want to rest on your laurels. So we're always checking with our people, engaging to make sure we are making changes. And by no means is everything perfect, but we're in a good space where we do have the willingness, the people and the resource to be able to address it. And it's always about, taking our people along on that journey as well.
And as we head towards the end of the interview, what are some of the lessons learned or the tips that you will provide to those listening if they're thinking, this is a journey we want to go on in our organisation, but oh my goodness, where do we start and what's ahead?
So as mentioned at the beginning, don't be afraid to start fresh. I know organisations have probably got some old risk assessments, lying away in some files somewhere or gathering dust somewhere. You don't have to update. You can start fresh. It can be quite scary, but it really opened us up for looking at it differently. Especially kind of around the controls and how you want to manage it. Don't do it alone. As you can, Ryan and I have involved so many different people and groups along the journey. If you've got different working groups in your organisation, as we've got mental health first responders, HSRs, employee-led networks, plus all of our subject matter experts, especially say in HR, employee relations, legal, risk and assurance, etc. Collaborate, ask others. Ryan, you can jump on this one.
Yeah, so the next one is sort of be flexible. So we did obviously use the ISO approach for managing and looking at our psychosocial hazards, but as you sort of saw, we pulled out traumatic materials from the work environment and task bucket, because that's the key focus we want to make sure people are safe. So we wanted to provide focus on that for our people. So you can use frameworks and they're all great, but make sure they're tailored to your business and fit your people, and make sure they provide the focus of what you want to focus on, because what might work great for us at Waka Kotahi might not be perfect for your organisation. So just be flexible with stuff. You don't have to be too rigid. Obviously, just get started. It's a really key point. You can do a lot of theorising, but I think if you just get started and put some stuff in place and give it a go, then it's a lot better than researching and doubting yourself. You'll most likely always have the tools that you need with a bit of support from others. So just getting started and getting underway is a really good point. And just remember, it's all about the people at the end of the day. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but that goes for things like engaging people in those assessments, making it easy, using plain language, as you sort of spoke about, Sarah, that, we can use a lot of jargon. People aren't going to know that, and it sort of puts people off. So trying to speak as colloquially as easy for people to engage with as you can sort of makes it easier. But yeah, it's all about people at the end of the day, and keeping that in top of mind is always going to mean that you have the right outcomes if you use that as your sort of guiding stars.
Thanks again for joining us today. If you found this discussion valuable and you're hungry for more ideas, head to the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing website at rowwellbeing.com. That's rowwellbeing.com. Here you can join the revolution, explore more resources, events and tips to help you break burnout culture for good, and you can register to attend our live recordings and be part of the conversation on the day. To those in our network, thanks again, and we look forward to catching up with you really soon.